Delivery driver Elias Flynn thought his day was ordinary until a delivery to tech billionaire Zane Corbin's sprawling Long Island mansion shattered his world. In Corbin's private study, an ornate silver frame held a photograph his wife, young but unmistakable. That face, those eyes, a small scar above the left eyebrow. Was it a shocking betrayal or a secret far darker, twisting through a stolen past? Elias, clutching the heavy package, was about to uncover a truth more unbelievable than any affair. Elias Flynn was 32 years old, a delivery driver for a logistics company, making a modest salary that, combined with his wife's income, was just enough for their apartment in Newark and the life they had carefully built. His wife, Jasmine, 28, worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. They were not wealthy, but they were happy, or so Elias believed, with their 4-year-old daughter, Lily, to raise, and both of them working long hours. Elias often felt like a single father, juggling work shifts, daycare pickups, and bedtime routines more nights than he could count. The mansion on Long Island's Gold Coast was certainly not on his usual route. Elias had picked up an overflow shift, covering for a sick colleague who normally handled the premium residential areas. When he pulled his truck through the impressive iron gates of the Corbin estate, he felt like he had driven into an entirely different world. The main house sprawled across what must have been at least 15,000 square feet of stone and glass, overlooking the Sound. This was old money, real money, the kind that made his monthly rent seem like mere pocket change. Zane Corbin, the tech billionaire who owned the estate, had ordered a collection of rare books, valued at $12,000. According to the invoice Elias had quickly glanced at. Elias rang the doorbell, shifted the heavy package in his arms, and waited. A housekeeper answered, directing him through a grand marble foyer into a study where Mr. Corbin would sign for the delivery. It was then that Elias's entire world shattered. The photo sat in an ornate silver frame on the polished mahogany desk, not hidden, not tucked away, but displayed prominently, as if it belonged there. Elias recognized the woman immediately, though she looked younger, perhaps 16 or 17. But those eyes, that captivating smile, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, they were unmistakable. It was Jasmine, his wife, in Zane Corbin's private study. Elias's hands went numb. The package slipped an inch before he caught it, the movement jerking him back to the present. His mind raced through possibilities, each one more horrifying than the last, an affair. But Jasmine had never mentioned knowing anyone wealthy. She had never shown any signs of infidelity. They told each other everything, or so he had believed, until 30 seconds ago. A voice from the doorway startled him. "Just set it on the side table there." Zane Corbin entered the study, barely glancing at Elias. The billionaire, in his late 50s, was silver-haired and commanded attention, an authority born from decades of people doing whatever he desired. He wore a casual sweater that likely cost more than Elias made in a month. Elias sat down the package with shaking hands. He knew he should leave, knew he should maintain his professionalism, get the signature, and depart. But his eyes kept drifting back to that photograph. "Is there a problem?" Zane's tone carried an edge of impatience. "That photo," Elias heard himself say, his voice thick with disbelief. "The woman in the silver frame. Where did you get it?" Zane's expression shifted. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "That's personal. Why do you ask?" "Because that's my wife." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Zane stared at Elias for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he moved to his desk, picked up the frame, and studied it as if seeing it for the first time in years. "Your wife," Zane repeated slowly. "What's her name?" Jasmine Flynn. She was Jasmine Williams before we married. Zane set the frame down carefully. I think you should leave. Not until you tell me why you have her photo. I do not owe you any explanations. You are here to deliver a package, nothing more. Zane pulled out his phone. If you do not leave immediately, I will call security. Elias wanted to argue, to demand answers, but he recognized the futility. Men like Zane Corbin did not explain themselves to people like him. He grabbed the delivery tablet, got Zane's scrolled signature, and left. But as he drove back toward the city, his mind would not stop spinning. How did Zane Corbin know Jasmine? When had that photo been taken? The frame looked expensive, antique even, the kind of thing one would use for someone truly important, not a casual acquaintance or a former employee. Elias knew something was deeply wrong, and he would not let it go. Jasmine was working late when Elias got home that evening. He sat in their small living room, the television playing to an empty room while Lily slept soundly in her bed, and tried to piece together a puzzle he did not understand. Jasmine had always been somewhat mysterious about her past. She had been adopted at 17 after spending most of her childhood in foster care. Her adoptive parents, the Williams, were good people who had passed away in a car accident 4 years ago. Jasmine rarely talked about her time before the adoption, always saying it was too painful, too complicated. Elias had respected that. Everyone had parts of their past they did not want to examine too closely. But now that silence felt different, suspicious. When Jasmine finally came home around 9 o'clock that evening, Elias was still sitting in the same spot, his delivery uniform still on. She kissed the top of his head, tired but smiling. Long day, she asked, heading to the kitchen. You could say that. Elias followed her. Jasmine, do you know a man named Zane Corbin? He watched her face carefully, looking for a tell, a flash of recognition, guilt, anything. But Jasmine just looked confused as she poured a glass of water. Zane Corbin, the tech guy, I mean. I know who he is from the news, but I do not know him personally. Why? She seemed genuinely puzzled. Elias wanted to believe her, but he had seen that photo. I delivered a package to his house today. He had a photograph of you on his desk. Jasmine's glass stopped halfway to her lips. What? That does not make any sense. That is what I thought. But it was definitely you, younger, maybe 16 or 17, but unmistakably you. That is impossible. I have never even met the man. But something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, but confusion, maybe even worry. Are you sure it was me? The scar above your eyebrow, your eyes, I would know you anywhere. Jasmine. She set down the glass and pulled out her phone. After a few moments of searching, she showed him the screen, a recent photo of Zane Corbin at some charity gala. This is him. Elias nodded. Jasmine stared at the photo for a long moment. I have never seen him before in my life, she said quietly. I swear to you, Elias, I do not know why he would have my picture. Elias wanted to believe her. In 6 years of marriage, Jasmine had never given him reason to doubt her, but the evidence was right there, unexplained and unsettling. Over the next week, Elias could not let it go. He started paying attention to things he had previously overlooked: Jasmine's phone habits, her schedule, the occasional expensive item that appeared in their apartment, a designer handbag she had claimed was a gift from a work colleague, a necklace she said she had found at a thrift store. He had never questioned these things before. Now they felt like red flags. He hated himself for the suspicion, hated the way he caught himself checking her phone when she was in the shower, scrolling through messages he had no right to read. But he found nothing incriminating, just normal conversations with coworkers and friends. Nothing about Zane Corbin, nothing secret or hidden. Then, on a Saturday in early December, everything changed again. Elias was grabbing coffee from their usual spot, a small cafe 3 blocks from their apartment. When he saw them, Jasmine and a man he did not recognize, sitting at a corner table. They were not touching, were not doing anything obviously inappropriate. But there was an intimacy to their conversation that made Elias's stomach drop. The man was well-dressed, an expensive suit, polished shoes. He slid a manila envelope across the table to Jasmine. Elias ducked behind a newspaper rack, his heart pounding. He watched as Jasmine opened the envelope, pulled out what looked like documents, and read through them. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked shocked, maybe even scared. The man reached across and squeezed her hand, said something Elias could not hear from his hiding spot. Jasmine nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. Elias left before they could see him. He walked home in a daze, his coffee forgotten. What had he just witnessed? Who was that man? What was in that envelope? When Jasmine came home 2 hours later, she was quiet, distant. She claimed she had been shopping, but she had no bags, no purchases to show for her time out. "Everything okay?" Elias asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, fine. Just tired." But she would not meet his eyes. That night, Elias lay awake long after Jasmine had fallen asleep. The pieces did not fit together, but they formed a picture he did not want to see: a wealthy billionaire with her photo, secret meetings with well-dressed men, expensive gifts with vague explanations, Jasmine's mysterious past that she never wanted to discuss. Elias had grown up working class in Brooklyn. His parents ran a small dry cleaning business, working 70-hour weeks to keep him fed and in decent schools. He had learned young that the world was not fair, that people like him had to work twice as hard for half as much. But he had also learned to trust his instincts. And right now, every instinct was screaming that something was profoundly wrong. The following Monday, Elias did something he had never imagined himself capable of. He called in sick to work and drove back out to the Corbin estate. He did not have a plan exactly, just a desperate need for answers that was eating him alive from the inside. He parked down the street, trying to figure out his next move, when he saw a Mercedes sedan pull through the gates, through his windshield. Elias could make out the driver, the same well-dressed man from the cafe, the man who had given Jasmine that envelope. Elias's hands clenched on the steering wheel, whatever was happening. It involved Zane Corbin, that mysterious man, and his wife, and Elias was going to find out what it was, even if the truth destroyed him. He had no idea that the truth was far stranger and more incredible than any affair or betrayal. He had no idea that the photograph on Zane Corbin's desk held a secret that would change everything he thought he knew about his wife, about family, and about the random chances that shaped their lives. 3 days later, Elias's resolve hardened into action. He had done research, digging into Zane Corbin's background with the obsessive focus of a man trying to save his marriage. Corbin had made his billions in software security in the early 2000s, then diversified into real estate and venture capital. Divorced twice. No children according to public records. Philanthropist. Political donor. Nothing that explained his connection to Jasmine. Elias had also tracked the mysterious man from the cafe. It took some work, but he had followed him from another meeting with Jasmine. Yes, there had been another meeting Elias had surveilled from across the street to a downtown office building. The directory listed him as Robert Collins, attorney at law. Not just any attorney. He specialized in estate planning and family law for high-net-worth clients. The pieces still did not fit into anything that made sense, but they all pointed back to Zane Corbin. Jasmine had been acting stranger by the day, more distracted, more secretive. She had started taking calls in the other room, her voice low and urgent. When Elias asked about it, she claimed it was work stress, but Jasmine had never been a good liar, and Elias could see the weight of whatever secret she was carrying in the tightness around her eyes, the way she started when he entered a room unexpectedly. On Thursday evening. Elias made a decision. He found Zane Corbin's private office address. Not the mansion, but his business headquarters in Manhattan, the next morning. Elias called in sick again and took the train into the city. The building was one of those glass towers in Midtown, all steel and modern art in the lobby. Elias felt out of place in his regular jeans and jacket, surrounded by people in $1,000 suits. But he made it past security with a lie about having a delivery. He then found his way to the 42nd floor, where Corbin Capital Management occupied half the level. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s, smiled professionally. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I need to speak with Mr. Corbin. It is urgent, personal." "I am afraid Mr. Corbin does not take unscheduled meetings. If you would like to tell him, it is about Jasmine Williams. Tell him the delivery driver from last month needs 5 minutes of his time." The receptionist's expression flickered. She picked up her phone, spoke quietly for a moment, then looked at Elias with new interest. "Mr. Corbin will see you, but you have 10 minutes, not 5. Elias was ushered through a maze of glass-walled offices to a corner suite with sweeping views of Central Park. Zane Corbin stood by the window, his back to the door. When he turned, his expression was guarded. "Mr. Flynn, I wondered if you would show up here eventually. You know my name." "I know a great many things. Mr. Flynn, sit. We have matters to discuss." Zane gestured to a leather chair, then settled behind his desk. That same silver-framed photograph sat in the corner, Jasmine's young face smiling out at them both. "You want to know about that picture? I want to know what you are doing with my wife." "I am not doing anything with your wife." Zane's tone was measured, careful. "Though I understand why you would think otherwise, given the circumstances." "Then explain the circumstances. Explain why you have her photo. Explain the secret meetings with lawyers. Explain why my wife has been lying to me for weeks." Elias's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. Zane studied him for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the desk. "Before you look at that, I need you to understand something. What I am about to tell you will sound impossible, but it is the truth, and I have the documentation to prove it." Elias opened the folder. Inside were photographs, old ones from what looked like the 1980s or early 90s, a young couple with a small child. The woman had Jasmine's eyes. The man had her smile. 2 years ago, Zane said quietly. "My younger brother and his wife died in a house fire. Their daughter was never found. The authorities assumed she had perished in the blaze, but no remains were ever recovered. The case went cold." Elias looked up sharply. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that 2 months ago I hired a private investigator to take one more look at that cold case. 25 years is a long time, but new forensic techniques, new databases. I wanted closure. What I found instead was evidence that my niece did not die in that fire. She was taken." The room felt like it was tilting. Elias gripped the edge of the desk. "That photo on my desk," Zane continued, "was taken 6 months after my brother's death by a security camera at a bus station in Philadelphia. A man was traveling with a girl matching my niece's description. The police at the time could not identify them, could not track them, but with modern facial recognition software, my investigator was able to trace that girl through various foster care records under different names. She was moved around constantly. Her identity changed multiple times until, finally, at age 17, she was adopted by a couple named Williams in Newark." "No," Elias whispered. But even as he said it, pieces were falling into place. Jasmine's mysterious past, her lack of family, the way she had always said her early childhood was too painful to remember. "I had DNA analysis done," Zane said gently, "from Jasmine's medical records. Nothing invasive or illegal. Just samples from routine blood work that medical labs keep on file. The match is conclusive. Jasmine Williams, your wife, is Maya Sterling, my brother's daughter, my niece." Elias could not breathe. Does she know? Not yet. I wanted to be absolutely certain before approaching her. I wanted to understand her life, make sure that revealing this information would not cause more harm than good. Zane's expression softened. I have been having her followed, Mr. Flynn, not to spy, but to protect her and to understand who she had become. That is why I know about you, about your marriage, about the life you have built together. The lawyer, Robert Collins, is preparing the documentation for when I finally tell her there is a substantial trust fund. Money her father left behind. Money that has been growing for 25 years. There are properties, investments. None of that matters compared to the truth she deserves to know about her identity. Elias's mind was reeling. Jasmine was not having an affair. She was not betraying him. She was caught in the middle of something she did not even know about, yet a past that had been stolen from her, a family she had never known she had. Why did you not just tell her? Elias asked. Because telling someone their entire childhood was a lie, that they were kidnapped and had their identity erased, that they have an uncle they never knew existed. That is not a conversation you rush into. I needed to be sure. I needed to be prepared to support her through whatever came next. Zane's voice carried genuine pain. I lost my brother and his wife. I thought I had lost Maya, too. Finding out she's alive, that she has been living just a few miles away all this time, it is a miracle and a tragedy all at once. Someone took her, Elias said, the implications sinking in. Someone deliberately separated her from her family. Yes, and I intend to find out who and why. Zane's expression hardened. But first, Jasmine needs to know the truth, and I think that conversation needs to happen with you there. She will need you. Mr. Flynn, this is going to turn her world upside down. Elias looked down at the photographs in the folder, a little girl who would grow up to be his wife, a brother who would never see his daughter again, a family destroyed by fire and secrets. His hands were shaking. When? He asked. Tomorrow, if you are willing. Robert Collins will be there with all the legal documentation. I have medical records, DNA results, everything she will need to verify what I'm telling her. Zane paused. I know this is not what you expected when you came here today. Elias let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I thought you were having an affair with my wife. I know. I am sorry for the secrecy, but I had to be certain. 25 years of wondering if she was alive. I could not risk being wrong. Zane stood, moved to the window. Your wife is my family, Mr. Flynn, the only family I have left. I am not trying to take her from you or disrupt your life. I just want the chance to know her, to give her back the truth that was stolen from her. Elias did not know what to say. The anger and suspicion that had been eating him alive for weeks suddenly had nowhere to go. In their place was an overwhelming sense of the strangeness of life, the random chances and terrible tragedies that shape people's paths without them ever knowing. She is going to need time, Elias said finally. This is going to be a lot. I know, and I will give her all the time she needs, but she deserves to know who she really is, who her parents were, what was taken from her. They sat in silence for a moment. Two men bound together by their love for the same woman, one as a husband, one as the uncle she had never known she had. Elias closed the folder and stood. Tomorrow, then. But I want to be the one to tell her you want to meet. She trusts me. This needs to come from me first. Zane nodded. Of course, whatever makes this easier for her. As Elias left the office, his mind spun with everything he had learned. He needed to tell Jasmine, needed to prepare her for what was coming. But how did you tell someone their entire life was built on a lie? How did you explain that the family she had lost had actually been stolen from her? The truth was about to shatter everything Jasmine thought she knew about herself. And Elias would be there to help her pick up the pieces, to stand by her as she discovered who she really was. But neither of them knew that the real story was just beginning. The question of who had taken Maya Sterling and why she had ended up in foster care with a new identity. Those answers were still waiting to be uncovered, and when they finally learned the truth, it would reveal a conspiracy that reached far deeper than anyone imagined. Elias drove home in a fog, his mind struggling to process everything Zane Corbin had told him. Maya Sterling, his wife, had been someone else entirely before she became Jasmine Williams. Kidnapped at age 4, her identity erased, her entire childhood stolen. How did you even begin to explain something like that? When he walked into their apartment, Jasmine was cooking dinner while Lily played with her toys in the corner. The normalcy of it, her humming along to music, the smell of garlic and tomatoes, their daughter's laughter. The life they had built together felt both precious and fragile. In a few hours, everything would change. "Hey, you," she said, smiling. "How was your day? We need to talk." Elias set his keys down carefully, his hands still trembling slightly. "Can you turn off the stove and sit down?" The smile faded from Jasmine's face. "Elias, you are scaring me. What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong, at least. I do not think so. But something has happened, and I need you to listen to everything I have to say before you react, okay?" They sat at their small kitchen table, the same one where they had eaten 1,000 meals together, where they had paid bills and made plans and dreamed about their future. Jasmine's hand found his across the scratched surface. "I went to see Zane Corbin today," Elias began. "I demanded to know why he had your photograph." Jasmine's eyes widened. "Elias, what?" "Let me finish. Please." He squeezed her hand. "He told me something that sounds impossible, but he has proof, DNA evidence, photographs, medical records. Jasmine, your real name is Maya Sterling. You are his niece. 25 years ago, you were taken from your family after your parents died in a fire. Someone kidnapped you and put you into foster care under a false identity." The color drained from Jasmine's face. For a long moment, she just stared at him, her mouth slightly open, unable to form words. "That is insane," she finally whispered. "That is not, I was in foster care, but that is because my parents abandoned me. That is what they told me. I was found wandering alone when I was 4. No identification, no family looking for you, because someone made sure no one could find you. They changed your name, moved you between facilities, kept you hidden." Elias pulled out his phone, showed her the photos Zane had given him. "This is your father, Zane's brother. This is your mother. Look at them. Jasmine, really, look." Jasmine took the phone with shaking hands. She stared at the photograph of the young couple with their small daughter. Tears started streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "I have dreams sometimes," she said softly, "about a woman with dark hair who sang to me, about a house with a big backyard and a tire swing. I always thought they were just fantasies, things I had made up because I wanted a family so badly." She looked up at Elias, her face anguished. "Are you telling me those memories are real?" "Zane wants to meet with you tomorrow. He has everything, documents, DNA results, your family's history. He wants to give you back the truth about who you are." Jasmine stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. "This is crazy. People do not just get kidnapped and have their whole identity erased. That does not happen in real life. It happened to you." Elias stood too, reaching for her. "I know it is overwhelming, but Jasmine, you have family, real family, an uncle who has been looking for you, who thought you were dead for 25 years. Why?" Jasmine's voice cracked. "Why would someone do this? Why would they take me?" "That is what we need to find out. Will you meet with Zane? Will you at least hear what he has to say?" Jasmine wrapped her arms around herself, looking lost and young. "I do not know if I can handle this. What if it is true? What if my whole life has been a lie?" Elias pulled her into his arms, feeling her shake against him. Then we deal with it together. The same way we deal with everything. But you deserve to know the truth, Jasmine. You deserve to know who you really are. The next afternoon, they sat in Robert Collins's office, a neutral space that felt less intimidating than Zane's corporate headquarters. The attorney was professional, but kind, laying out documents on the conference table with careful precision. Zane sat across from them, his expression a mix of hope and nervousness that made him seem more human than the commanding billionaire Elias had first encountered. Ms. Williams, or Ms. Sterling, if you prefer, I want to start by saying how sorry I am. Zane began. Sorry for your loss. Sorry for the years you spent alone. Sorry for approaching this in a way that may have seemed secretive or frightening. Jasmine's hand found Elias's under the table, gripping tight. Just tell me what you know. For the next hour, Zane laid it all out. His brother David and sister-in-law, Nicole, had died on March 15th, 1999, when their house in Westchester burned down. Their daughter Maya, age 4, was presumed dead, but no body was ever found, and the fire investigation had been oddly incomplete. I was living in California at the time, building my company, Zane explained, his voice heavy with old regret. I flew back for the funeral, tried to get answers, but the case went cold within months. I blame myself for not being there, for not pushing harder. Robert Collins slid a DNA report across the table. This confirms with 99.9% certainty that you share approximately 25% of your DNA with Mr. Corbin, consistent with an avuncular relationship. You are Maya Sterling. Jasmine stared at the document, her hands trembling. Who took me? Where have they been all this time? That is what I have spent the last 2 months trying to find out, Zane said. And 3 days ago, my investigator finally found the answer. It is not pleasant. He pulled out another file, this one thicker. Your parents' fire was not an accident. David worked as a financial analyst for a private equity firm called Hartwell Partners. In early 1999, he discovered that the firm's founder, Charles Bennett, was running a massive Ponzi scheme, millions of dollars stolen from investors, most of them retirees who trusted Bennett with their life savings. Elias felt Jasmine tense beside him. My father knew about it. He was going to expose it. He compiled evidence, contacted the SEC, was planning to testify, but before he could, the fire happened. Zane's jaw tightened. Charles Bennett's brother-in-law was a fire inspector. The investigation was deliberately botched, and Charles's sister, a woman named Helen Crawford, worked for the state's Child Protective Services. The implications hit Elias like a physical blow. They took her to keep her as leverage. That is my investigator's theory. With Maya alive somewhere, David's evidence might have seemed less credible, a grief-stricken brother making accusations, unable to even protect his own family. And if David had left any additional documentation, any insurance policy, they would need Maya alive to access it. Zane looked at Jasmine with profound sadness. You were not killed because you were more valuable alive, a ghost that could be controlled if needed. But they never needed me. Jasmine whispered, because my father died before he could expose them. Yes. So you were simply discarded into the foster system under a false name, moved around every year or two to keep you invisible. Helen Crawford had the connections to make it all work, to bury your real identity so deep that no one would ever find it. Jasmine stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to all of them. Elias could see her shoulders shaking. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I remember being scared, being in a car with a woman who said my parents were gone, that I needed to be quiet and good, or bad things would happen. I remember foster homes, different names, people telling me to forget who I was before. She turned, tears streaming down her face. I thought I was going crazy. I thought those memories were nightmares. They were real, Zane said gently. All of it was real. and I am so sorry I did not find you sooner. Where are they now? Jasmine's voice turned hard. Charles Bennett and Helen Crawford. Where are the people who did this to me? Robert Collins cleared his throat. That is complicated. Charles Bennett's Ponzi scheme was eventually exposed in 2004, after the statute of limitations on the arson and kidnapping had passed in some jurisdictions. He served 8 years in federal prison for securities fraud, but was released in 2012. He has been living quietly in Connecticut ever since. Helen Crawford retired from child services in 2008. She is in her 70s now, living in Florida. They got away with it, Jasmine said flatly. They murdered my parents, kidnapped me, ruined my life, and they got away with it. Not necessarily, Zane said. New evidence, new testimony, new charges can still be filed. Murder has no statute of limitations. And now we have you proof that you survived. Proof of what they did. Elias watched his wife's face transform. The shock and grief were still there. But underneath was something harder, something determined. I want them to pay, Jasmine said quietly. I want everyone to know what they did. Over the next 2 weeks, Jasmine threw herself into piecing together her stolen past. Zane opened his home to her, sharing photo albums and videos of her parents. She watched herself as a toddler, heard her father's laugh, saw her mother's smile. Each discovery was both a gift and a wound, glimpses of a life that had been ripped away. Elias watched her change. The woman he had known, sweet, gentle Jasmine, who worked quietly as a bookkeeper and rarely made waves, was discovering a core of steel she had never known she possessed. This was Maya Sterling, daughter of a man who had tried to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. Zane had offered her access to the trust fund, nearly $8 million accumulated over 25 years. Jasmine had looked at the number and felt nothing. Money could not buy back her childhood or bring back her parents, but it could fund something else justice. I want to hire investigators, she told Zane and Elias one evening in late December. They sat in Zane's study, the same room where Elias had first seen her photograph. I want to find every piece of evidence that connects Bennett and Crawford to what happened. I want it airtight. The family attorney already has people looking into it, Zane said. But Jasmine, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we cannot prove everything. It has been 25 years. Evidence degrades. Witnesses die. Memories fade. Then we find what we can, and we make it count. Jasmine's voice was steady. These people took everything from me. They do not get to just live out their retirement in peace. Elias had never been prouder of her, or more worried. Jasmine, this is going to be hard. Going up against people like that, reliving everything. I know, but I need to do this. Elias, I need them to know that Maya Sterling did not disappear, that they failed to erase me. She took his hand. I need you to understand why this matters. I do understand, and I am with you. Whatever you need. What they needed, it turned out, was a small miracle, and they got it from an unexpected source. In mid-January, Zane's head investigator, a former FBI agent named Michelle Carter, requested an urgent meeting. She arrived at the apartment with a laptop and an expression Elias could not quite read. I found someone, Michelle said without preamble. Someone who worked for Charles Bennett in 1999. His name is Frank Morrison, and he is dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, maybe 3 months left. He has decided he wants to clear his conscience before he goes. Jasmine leaned forward. He knows something. He knows everything. He was Bennett's right-hand man, helped him run the Ponzi scheme. He was there the night they planned the fire. Michelle opened her laptop, turned it so they could see. He is willing to give a formal deposition. He will testify to everything: the scheme, the murder, the kidnapping. He says he has lived with the guilt for 25 years, and he wants to make it right before he dies. Elias felt Jasmine's hand tighten in his. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come forward after all this time?" "He has grandchildren. Says he cannot die knowing they might someday learn what he did and think he was a monster. He wants to do one decent thing before the end." Michelle's expression softened. "I know it is not much of a redemption arc, but his testimony could be the key to everything." Within days, Frank Morrison gave a videotaped deposition that laid out the entire conspiracy. He described how Charles Bennett had panicked when David Sterling discovered the fraud, how they had planned to make it look like an accident, how Helen Crawford, Bennett's sister, had suggested taking the child instead of killing her, to leverage insurance and muddy the waters if David had left behind evidence. "We told ourselves we were saving her," Morrison said on the tape, his voice weak and raspy, "that she would have a better life than being orphaned. But the truth is, we were monsters. We took that little girl and threw her into the system like she was garbage. And Maya's parents, David and Nicole, were good people. They did not deserve what happened to them." Jasmine watched the deposition with tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Elias held her hand while Zane sat stone-faced, his jaw tight with rage. "That is enough," Robert Collins said, pausing the video. "We have what we need. With this testimony, we can move forward." "Move forward how?" Jasmine asked. "Criminal charges against Charles Bennett and Helen Crawford for conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, child endangerment, and fraud. The DA will need to review everything. But with Morrison's testimony and the supporting evidence we have gathered, we have a strong case." Jasmine nodded slowly. "I want to be there when they are arrested. I want them to see my face and know they failed." Michelle Carter smiled grimly. "I think that can be arranged." The arrests happened on a cold morning in February. Elias took the day off work to be with Jasmine when the news broke. They watched from Zane's penthouse as news helicopters circled Helen Crawford's daughter's house in Garden City, where the elderly woman had been staying. Police led her out in handcuffs, her face shocked and pale. In Connecticut, Charles Bennett's arrest was less dramatic, but more satisfying. He had been having breakfast at a country club when federal agents arrived. The news cameras caught him trying to maintain his dignity as he was escorted out past stunned fellow members. "Former financial executive and CPS worker arrested in cold case murder and kidnapping," the headline read, by evening. Every major news outlet was covering the story. The case had everything murder, conspiracy, a child stolen and lost for decades, and finally, justice. Jasmine watched it all with an expression Elias could not quite read. Not satisfaction exactly, more like exhaustion mixed with grim determination. "It is not over," she said quietly. "The trial will take months, maybe years. They will fight it. They will try to discredit Morrison's testimony, claim the evidence is too old, argue technicalities." "Let them fight," Zane said. He joined them at the penthouse. The three of them were bound together by blood and purpose. "We have the truth on our side, and we have something they took away 25 years ago. We have Maya Sterling alive and ready to face them." That night, Jasmine could not sleep. She and Elias lay in bed in their small, comfortable apartment. They had refused to move, despite Zane's offers of better accommodations. This place was theirs, a life they had built with their own hands. "Do you ever wonder who I would have been?" Jasmine asked in the darkness. "If none of this had happened, if I had grown up as Maya Sterling with parents who loved me and an uncle who would have spoiled me and a normal, stable childhood." Elias pulled her closer. "I think about it, but I also know that person would not be the woman I fell in love with. You are who you are because of everything you survived, and you are incredible." "I am angry," Jasmine admitted. "I am so angry all the time now. Angry at what they took. Angry at the years I spent thinking I was nobody, that I did not matter. Angry that my parents died for trying to do the right thing." "That is okay. You are allowed to be angry, but I do not want anger to be all I have. I do not want this to consume me." She turned to face him in the dark. "Promise me something, Elias. Promise me that no matter what happens with the trial, no matter how this ends, we do not let it destroy who we are. We do not let them take anything else from us." "I promise," Elias said, and meant it. The preliminary hearings began in March. Jasmine testified, her voice steady as she described her fragmented memories of being taken. The years of confusion in foster care, the identity that had been stolen. She looked directly at Charles Bennett and Helen Crawford as she spoke, refusing to let them look away. Frank Morrison appeared via video link from a hospice facility, his testimony damning and detailed. The defense attorneys tried to discredit him, convicted felon, dying man trying to ease his conscience. No physical evidence to support his claims. But Michelle Carter had been thorough. She had found the fire inspector's falsified report, traced the money that had changed hands, documented Helen Crawford's unusual involvement in Maya's case. Piece by piece, the conspiracy was laid bare in April. Frank Morrison died, but his deposition remained a ghost testifying from beyond the grave about sins that could no longer be hidden. The trial was set for June, and Jasmine Sterling, she had started using her birth name. Though Elias still called her Jasmine in private, was prepared to face the people who had destroyed her family. And finally, after 25 years, demand they answer for what they had done. But as spring turned to summer, none of them realized that the trial would reveal one more secret, one final piece of the puzzle that would change everything they thought they knew about that night in 1999. And the real reason Maya Sterling had been taken. The complete truth was still waiting to be uncovered, and when it finally came to light, it would be stranger and more heartbreaking than any of them had imagined. The trial of Charles Bennett and Helen Crawford began on the first Monday in June, in a federal courthouse in Manhattan. Elias took a leave of absence from his delivery job. Zane had offered to cover their expenses, and, for once, Jasmine had accepted. This was more important than pride. The courtroom was packed. Jasmine sat in the front row with Elias on one side and Zane on the other, a united front. Across the aisle, Charles Bennett sat with his expensive defense team, looking older than his 73 years, but still carrying himself with the arrogance of someone who had gotten away with everything for decades. Helen Crawford, 76 and frail-looking, sat separately with her own attorney. The two defendants had not spoken to each other since their arrests, a crack in their alliance that the prosecution intended to exploit. Assistant District Attorney Sandra Mitchell was sharp and relentless. In her opening statement, she laid out the case methodically. David Sterling's discovery of the Ponzi scheme, his intention to report it, the convenient fire that killed him and his wife, and the daughter who disappeared without a trace. Maya Sterling did not die in that fire, Mitchell told the jury. She was taken deliberately, systematically, by people who saw a 4-year-old child not as a human being, but as a loose end to be managed, and for 25 years. They thought they had gotten away with it. But Maya Sterling is here today, alive and ready to tell you what they did to her. The defense's strategy became clear. They would argue that Frank Morrison's testimony was unreliable, a dying man's delusions motivated by medication and guilt over unrelated crimes. They would claim the fire had been a tragic accident, that Maya's disappearance into foster care was a bureaucratic failure, not a kidnapping. They would say the connections the prosecution had drawn were circumstantial at best. "My client is 73 years old," Charles Bennett's attorney argued. "He served his time for the securities fraud, crimes he deeply regrets, but he is not a murderer. He is not a kidnapper. And the prosecution's case rests entirely on the word of a convicted felon who waited until he was literally on his deathbed to suddenly remember this elaborate conspiracy." But the prosecution had more than Frank Morrison's testimony. On the third day of trial, Sandra Mitchell called Dr. Michael Patterson, a forensic analyst who had reviewed the original fire investigation. He testified that the fire's point of origin and burn patterns were consistent with arson, not an electrical fault, as the original report claimed. More damning. He identified 3 significant omissions in the original fire inspector's work omissions that any competent investigator would have noticed. This was not incompetence, Dr. Patterson stated. This was deliberate falsification designed to support a predetermined conclusion. The defense tried to argue that mistakes happen, that second-guessing a 25-year-old investigation was unfair, but Mitchell was ready. She produced financial records showing a $50,000 deposit into the fire inspector's account, 2 weeks after the blaze money that came from a shell corporation, later tied to Charles Bennett's network of fraudulent entities. Elias watched Jasmine's face as the evidence mounted. She sat perfectly still, her expression composed, but he could see the toll it was taking in the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands clenched in her lap. On the 5th day, Jasmine took the stand. Sandra Mitchell guided her through her testimony gently but thoroughly. Jasmine described her fragmented memories of that night, being taken by a woman who said her parents were gone, the terror of not understanding what was happening. She spoke about the years in foster care, the constant moves, the feeling of being erased. "They told me different stories about where I came from," Jasmine said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Sometimes I was abandoned. Sometimes I was found wandering. The details always changed. I grew up thinking I was nobody, that I did not matter enough for anyone to keep track of my story." "And when did you learn the truth?" Mitchell asked. 4 months ago, when my husband discovered my photograph in my uncle's home. When I learned that I was not nobody. I was Maya Sterling, and I had parents who loved me, and an uncle who never stopped looking for me. I learned that I mattered, that I had always mattered. The defense's cross-examination was brutal. They tried to suggest her memories were false, implanted by suggestion and the desire to believe Zane's story. They pointed out inconsistencies in her recollections, dates that did not quite line up, details that seemed too vague. "Is it not true, Ms. Sterling," Bennett's attorney pressed, "that you have no actual memory of being taken, as you claim, that your earliest clear memories are from age 6 or 7 in foster care?" "My earliest clear memories are from that age," Jasmine agreed. "But I have fragments from before images, feelings, moments, and they match what actually happened. They match the truth. Or they match what you have been told happened, what you want to believe happened, because it gives your difficult childhood a narrative that makes you the victim of a conspiracy rather than the victim of ordinary tragedy." Elias saw Jasmine's jaw tighten, but her voice remained calm. "I am the victim of a conspiracy. The evidence proves that, and nothing you say can change what they did to me." The trial's turning point came in the 2nd week when Helen Crawford's attorney made a calculated move, seeing the evidence mounting against his client. He approached the prosecution with an offer Helen would testify against Charles Bennett in exchange for a reduced sentence. The courtroom was electric the day Helen Crawford took the stand. She looked smaller than she had during the arrests, diminished by age and the weight of her crimes. But her memory was sharp, and her testimony was devastating. "Charles called me the day after David Sterling contacted the SEC," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was panicking. He said David had enough evidence to destroy everything, to send him to prison for decades. He asked if there was a way to make it stop." "And what did you suggest?" Sandra Mitchell asked. "Nothing. Not at first. But then Charles's brother-in-law, the fire inspector, he suggested making it look like an accident." Helen's voice broke, "And I said if they went through with it, they needed to be careful about the child, that if she survived, she could be a complication later." "What did Mr. Bennett say to that?" "He said to take care of it, to make sure she disappeared but stayed alive in case they needed leverage if David had left evidence behind somewhere." Helen looked at Jasmine for the first time, her eyes filled with tears. "I am sorry,"
I am so sorry. I told myself I was saving you by not letting them kill you, too. But I know that is not true.
I was just covering for their crime. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for order. Jasmine sat frozen, staring at the woman who had stolen her childhood, who had thrown her into the system and erased her identity. Under cross-examination, Helen revealed more details how she had personally handled Maya's case file, creating a false history and moving her between facilities to keep her invisible, how she had checked on her periodically over the years, always from a distance, making sure she stayed lost in the system. Did you ever consider telling the truth? The prosecutor asked.
Every day, Helen said, her voice breaking. But I was afraid. Afraid of prison. Afraid of what Charles might do to me or my family if I talked. So I stayed quiet. And I let that little girl suffer for my cowardice.
The defense tried to salvage something, suggesting Helen was lying to save herself, that her testimony was self-serving. But the details matched too perfectly with the evidence, with Jasmine's fragmented memories, with Frank Morrison's deposition. Charles Bennett's face was ashen as Helen stepped down. His empire of lies was crumbling, and everyone in the courtroom could see it. The prosecution rested after 2 more days of witnesses, financial experts who traced the money, child welfare workers who confirmed the irregularities in Maya's case. Even the Williams' former attorney who testified about how unusual it had been for Jasmine to have so little documentation when they adopted her. The defense put up a fight, but it was clearly a losing battle. They called character witnesses who spoke of Charles's philanthropy in later years, his regret over the Ponzi scheme. They tried to paint Helen as the mastermind, suggesting she had acted independently, but the evidence was overwhelming. And when the defense rested without calling either defendant to testify, the jury's verdict seemed inevitable. Closing arguments took 2 days. The defense argued reasonable doubt, the unreliability of testimonies from criminals in the distant past. The prosecution laid out the timeline with devastating precision, every piece of evidence, every connection, every lie that had sustained the conspiracy for 25 years. Maya Sterling was 4 years old. Sandra Mitchell told the jury in her final statement, 4 years old when these defendants decided her life was worth less than their freedom. They murdered her parents. They took her from her home. They erased her identity and threw her away. And they went on with their lives thinking they had gotten away with it. But Maya Sterling did not disappear. She survived. She grew up. She built a life despite everything they did to her. And she is here today asking you to hold them accountable for what they took from her, for the parents she will never know, for the childhood that was stolen, for 25 years of lies. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Elias held Jasmine's hand so tightly his fingers went numb. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, how do you find guilty? On the count of kidnapping, guilty. On the count of child endangerment, guilty. Every count, every charge, guilty. Charles Bennett sat motionless as the verdicts were read, his face blank. Helen Crawford wept quietly, her shoulders shaking. Jasmine did not react visibly. She just sat there, Elias's hand in hers, and breathed. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Charles Bennett received 25 years to life, effectively a death sentence for a 73-year-old man. Helen Crawford, because of her cooperation, received 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10. Given her age and health, neither would likely die free. But the story did not end there. After the sentencing, Zane's investigator, Michelle Carter, requested one final meeting. They gathered in Zane's study, the same place where Elias had first learned the truth about Jasmine's identity.
There is something we missed, Michelle said, opening her laptop. Something that did not come up in the trial because it was not directly relevant to the criminal case. But I think you need to know. She pulled up a photograph, an old picture of David Sterling with another man, both young, both in business suits. David kept a safety deposit box that we only found last week. Inside was documentation of the Ponzi scheme, evidence he had planned to give to the SEC. But there was also this. She handed Jasmine a letter, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. Jasmine's hands shook as she unfolded it. "My dearest Maya," she read aloud, her voice breaking. "If you are reading this, it means something has happened to your mother and me. It means I was not able to protect you the way I should have. But know this, you are loved beyond measure. You are strong, brilliant, and kind. Everything your mother and I dreamed you would be. I have discovered things at work that I cannot ignore. Bad people doing bad things that will hurt many innocent families. I have to stop it, even if it puts us in danger. Your Uncle Zane will take care of you if anything happens to us. He loves you as much as we do. Never forget who you are. Maya. You are a sterling. You come from a line of people who stand up for what is right, even when it is hard, even when it costs us everything. I hope you never have to read this, but if you do, know that your mother and I will always be with you, proud of everything you become. All my love forever. Dad." Jasmine clutched the letter to her chest, sobbing. Zane moved to her side, his own eyes wet. Elias wrapped his arms around her, holding her as 25 years of grief finally poured out. "He knew," Jasmine whispered. "He knew what might happen, and he did the right thing anyway. He was brave." "Just like his daughter," Zane said quietly. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine worked with victim services to try to locate other children who might have been similarly lost in the system due to Helen Crawford's corruption. They found 3 cases that raised red flags: children with incomplete records, mysterious origins, families that had been searching for them. The truth had opened doors that had been closed for decades. Jasmine also started working with Zane's foundation, using her experience and her trust fund to reform foster care oversight in New York. She testified before the state legislature, sharing her story and pushing for better tracking systems, more accountability, stronger protections for vulnerable children. Elias watched her transform. She was still his Jasmine, still the woman he had fallen in love with, still the person who hummed while cooking and left notes in his lunch. But she had also become Maya Sterling, heir to a legacy of courage and conviction. One evening in early August, they sat on the small balcony of their apartment, watching the sun set over Newark. Little Lily was asleep inside, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Jasmine had been quiet all day, thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Marrying a delivery driver's girlfriend instead of a billionaire's niece?" Elias laughed. "I did not marry a billionaire's niece. I married you. The money, the family drama, the courtroom theatrics, that is all just stuff that happened. You are still the woman who laughed at my terrible jokes and said yes when I proposed with a ring I saved 6 months to buy." "That was a good ring," Jasmine said, smiling. "I still wear it, even though you could afford better now. It is not about the price. It is about what it means." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for standing by me through all of this, for believing me, for supporting me, for being exactly who I needed when my world fell apart. That is what marriage is," Elias said simply. "Being there when things fall apart." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker on as darkness fell. In the distance, Elias could see the skyline of Manhattan, where Zane's penthouse rose among the other towers. Somewhere out there, Charles Bennett and Helen Crawford sat in prison cells, paying for their crimes. Somewhere, other families were being reunited with children they had thought were lost forever. And here on this small balcony in Newark, a delivery driver and the woman who had been nobody, and someone, all at once,
had found something that all the money and power in the world could not buy: a love built on truth, tested by fire, and strong enough to weather any storm.
I have been thinking, Jasmine said after a while, about having more kids. If we expanded our family, I want to tell them about my parents, about David and Nicole, and how they died trying to do the right thing. I want those kids to know where they come from. I think that is beautiful, Elias said. They will have an incredible legacy to live up to, and they will have you to teach them that heroism is not about money or power. It is about showing up, telling the truth, and loving people, even when it is complicated. Jasmine turned to look at him. You are the hero of this story. Elias, you found that photograph. You pushed for answers. You refused to let it go. You gave me back my family.
We gave each other everything that matters, Elias corrected, and we will keep doing that through whatever comes next. 6 months later. Elias stood in Zane's mansion, now a place he visited regularly, no longer intimidated by the wealth or the setting, and watched Jasmine give a speech to a room full of philanthropists and child welfare advocates. She spoke about her experience, about the gaps in the system that had allowed her to be lost, about the changes that were already being implemented to protect other children. She was confident, articulate, powerful. The woman who had once been too scared to speak up at work meetings was now commanding the attention of some of the wealthiest and most influential people in New York. When the speech ended, Zane approached Elias with 2 glasses of champagne. She is remarkable, Zane said, watching Jasmine network with the crowd. She always was, Elias replied. The world just did not know it yet. I am glad she had you. Through all of this, you were her constant. That matters more than anything I could have given her. Elias clinked his glass against Zane's. She would have been fine without me, but I am glad she did not have to be. That night, back in their apartment, they decided to stay in Newark, despite numerous offers to help them move somewhere more appropriate. Jasmine kicked off her heels and collapsed on the couch with a sigh. Tired? Elias asked. Exhausted, but good exhausted. She patted the couch beside her. Come here. Elias sat, and she immediately curled into his side the way she always did when she needed comfort or connection or just the reassurance of his presence. I was thinking today about what you asked me once, Jasmine said, about who I would have been if none of this had happened, if I had grown up as Maya Sterling from the beginning, and I think I would have been happy, privileged, maybe a little spoiled. She smiled, but I would not have been as strong. I would not have learned to survive, to rebuild, to find value in myself without any external validation. I would not have met you. You might have met someone better, Elias teased. There is no one better. There is just you, the man who saw me when I was invisible, who loved me when I was nobody, who stood by me when I discovered I was somebody's daughter and niece and heir. You did not care about any of that. You just cared about me. Elias kissed the top of her head. That is all that ever mattered. I learned something through all of this, Jasmine said softly. Something I want to remember forever. What is that? That justice is not just about punishment. It is about truth. It is about making sure that people know what happened, that the victims are seen and heard, that the lies do not get to become the official story. My parents died trying to tell the truth, and in the end, the truth won. It took 25 years, but it won. She sat up, looking at him with those eyes that had stared out from a photograph in a billionaire's study and changed both their lives forever. And I learned that family is not just about blood or shared history. It is about the people who show up, who stand beside you when everything falls apart, who believe you even when the truth seems impossible. She took his hand. You are my family, Elias. You always will be. You always will. And you are mine, Elias said, through everything, forever. They sat together in their small apartment, surrounded by the life they had built with their own hands. Outside, the city hummed with millions of other stories, tragedies and triumphs, secrets and revelations, justice delayed, but never denied. But inside, there was only truth, only love, only the quiet certainty that they had faced the worst and come through stronger. Together. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is becoming more than what those who wronged you ever imagined possible. It is taking what they meant to destroy and turning it into something beautiful, something true, something that matters. Maya Sterling had been taken. Jasmine Williams had been lost. But the woman who emerged from those ashes was stronger than either name alone. She was herself, fully realized, finally free. And that was a kind of justice no verdict could ever match.